What about the rumors becoming legends and myths over time? Could the miracles in the New Testament be a result of the telephone game?
All right. Well, there's multiple answers to that, and I'll let some of the other team go around. But I just want to say there's an interesting connection to one of the questions that was asked a bit earlier, which was also to do with the Gospels and the reports in the Gospels, which is why are some of the Gospels different? Now, you've got to understand that there is a difference between different and contradictory. So, what you have to remember is that the four Gospels are written by four different people. One of three of them, rather, would have experienced a lot of the stuff firsthand. One of those three would have needed to have taken a few other eyewitnesses from other places. And one of them even states at the beginning that he has spent an enormous amount of time and effort making sure that he has actually spoken to all of those eyewitnesses. I'm, of course, talking about the two who experienced it all was Matthew and John. The one who experienced most of it but would have needed to have a few other outside sources would have been Mark, and Luke, who, as far as we can tell, was certainly an academic into, doctor and the like. He made sure that he had seen eyewitness accounts and had spoken, and of course knew people who had spoken to Jesus and had served with Jesus and had been with Jesus, because we find in the book of Acts that he worked with those people. Okay, one of the things that you find that's interesting when you look into the Gospels is, although they are four different people recording four separate accounts of what happened, there is no contradiction but a remarkable amount of overlap, even down to the tiniest little details, such as things about detail as where things took place, what happened at the place, and details about the place that really have got no bearing in mythology unless you actually saw these things happen there. It would be like picking a random little village in the middle of nowhere in the north of Scotland and saying that something happened here. If you're trying to do that or make up a myth or a story, you wouldn't do that because you've never been there. So what you would do is say, London, that's the biggest town or city right in the whole of the United Kingdom. So you start to find that all of a sudden these little things come together. When you begin to look at it like that, not only do you get to a point that there's no way that this could have been fabricated, but the fact that you've actually got a lot of evidence that the Gospels have remained unchanged over time. We do have historical manuscripts going back vast amounts of ages, and they are effectively unchanged. We do have manuscripts going back even further than, obviously, you've seen proposals, right, that the manuscripts were written, during the Middle Ages kind of thing. We've got stuff earlier than that detailing the Gospels for sure. So the fact that you've got an amazing amount of correlation between the four Gospels, stated that eyewitnesses are part of it, and an integral part of it, also stated in the fact that you have more than just one or two eyewitnesses or two or three eyewitnesses, you have multiple eyewitnesses, coupled with the fact that you have details which cannot be fabricated, they have to have been experienced. You're all of a sudden dealing with something which, quite frankly, should be one of, even by secular standards, the most trustworthy sources of history, full stop, right? So it's interesting that it gets often rejected by secular standards, because it certainly outshines any older manuscripts that are taken as accurate. Any other comments, folks?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly jump in here. Dr. Gary Habermas, who is considered probably the world's foremost expert on the resurrection, and has done copious amounts of research into this. We'll be covering a bit more about that next week. Has highlighted this issue. If you look at any sort of Greco-Roman history document that was written, if you're going to use the argument of, we should discount the Bible because it's got miracles in it. Well, if you look at any Greco-Roman historical document, they all have miracles in them, and yet we still trust them. Also, an interesting note is we know about Alexander the Great. The most trusted resource we have about Alexander the Great comes 300 years after his death, and yet we still trust that. It's basically unheard of that we have such copious amounts of eyewitness testimony, and they are written in the style of Greco-Roman historian eyewitness. It follows the stanza of da 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 da. It's written in the exact same way, all of the Gospels, as well as also you've got the interlineating, the overlap, as Joe said, with all the different Gospel accounts, with all the different details. They don't contradict. They show things from different standpoints, which is consistent with eyewitness testimony, which is still in use today by the police, and is actually used to weed out people who are fabricating a testimony, because if everyone's identical, it's most likely made up. There's oodles of things you can go into, but I mean, to be perfectly honest, it's a non-starter, this argument about becoming myths and legends over time. This is coming from a Jewish perspective. The Jews were notorious for details. They were a stickler for details and writing things down accurately. That was ingrained into them from the time they were born. And that's just a few things I've got to share on that one.
Cool.
I would also add, who were the first witnesses? It was two women. If you wanted to start a myth, and start a rumor, the last thing you would have done would start with the testimonies of the women, because they weren't accepted. They were not respected as we do today. They weren't even allowed to serve as testimonies in a Jewish court of law. Their testimony wasn't valid. And yet that's who Jesus appears to first. And so
it's the criteria of embarrassment. Which it proves that the document is accurate, because if the spreading of the church as it's going across the world, especially if it's dealing with the local laws and traditions and things like that, they considered women's testimony as basically dirt. You couldn't be trusted. So who does Jesus appear to first? Women. It was a hindrance to the church, and why put it in the Gospels if you're going to make it up?
Yes.
Unless it is an actual accurate record of what happened. And that's the point.
That's it.